Hi everyone, and welcome back to Business Law and Ethics. This is Tony Brancatella. Now we're going to do part 2 of chapter 7, and here we go. This is a short one. Today's class certainly will be a little shorter. I do have the same scenario as we did yesterday, but we will certainly try to finish sooner. Learning objectives here, we're pretty much the same as part 1, but we're going to go into different things about personal property, rights obligation associated with bailment. That's a word that you really need to know. We're going to look at innkeepers and also look at the outline of the protection of the environment here in Canada. So here we go. Like I said, this is going to be short and sweet. And this time around also, I won't put any links. I want you guys to look up some links and get some more information. You will have a little project to do afterwards and questions also and quiz. So I want you to take a look at that. Here we go. So personal property is certainly movable. There are two categories: choses in action, which we did last class, and chattel or goods. So choses in action are intangibles. That means they are not solid. They are bonds, share certificates, or negotiable instruments. Versus a chattel, well, here you have electronic devices. It could be clothes, animals, and even motor vehicles. So chattel to fixture can become part of a real property for the following reasons: if it is attached to the land, also if it improves the land, if it enhances the land, it can also be chattel to fixture. The problems here that can happen is with third parties, like creditors or tenants become involved. That could create certain issues. So in cases of a tenant attaches fixtures to enhance trade or carry on business, he has the right to remove it, and that could cause issues if he does something that he's not supposed to. We also have took a look at finders keepers. I'm sure you heard of this term, but this is an actual term that is used in law, and for the following reasons, following ways. A finders keepers is a person who finds an object in a park, public place, certainly not in a park or a backyard of someone, or even as long as it is a public place, has the right to do it. That can be only accepted by the prior owner, right? So it really happens if it's he finds it, he keeps it. So what that also means that if the rightful owner finds out that you have found something that belongs to them, then certainly you would have to give it back if they can prove it, if there's proof. That's what that means. Also, finders keepers, only the rightful owner or someone with propriety interest, secured credit, can demand it from the finder. Same thing here, right? So the rightful owner is the only one that could get it back. Also, if the good was found in private property, usually the owner of the property has the right to the item. So no matter what it is, if the wind blew it in, I have a kid in the backyard that always kicks his ball in my yard. Believe it or not, that ball, since I found it in my yard, that is my ball. All right, so this is what you have to realize. That is a funny little way of saying it, but that's the way it is. Let's say you have someone has a drone or something, and it falls in your backyard, and you find it. Well, then it's yours, right? So that's the way it works. And now look at bailment, right? So a bailment it exists when one person takes temporary possession of personal property owned by another. So this is bailment. So there's a bailer and there is a bailee, right? So if you look at bailment, it requires a transfer of possession. It requires a voluntary acceptance of the common law duty of safekeeping. It requires the possession not to be permanent, it has to be temporary, and there is certainly a duty to take care of those goods. So it's the same thing like if you go to jail, you have to pay bail. You know, if the judge says, well, you're going to have to pay X amount of dollars, or you need to show that you can afford to pay bail, that bail is temporary. You get that back if you found innocent. Also, bailment for value or reward involves a mutual benefit or consideration flowing between the two parties. Gratuitous occurs when only one side receives a benefit. What I'd like you to do on this subject, I know you're going to have a lot of questions about bailment, but there's going to be a question in the questions, and I want you to look up more instances about bailment or examples of here in Canada. So I'd like to answer you, give you more information, but since it's going to be a little shorter class, I really want you guys to focus and find out more information on your own about bailment. Then there's also involuntary bailment. As soon as you exercise that control, it creates the bailment. That means the obligations of a gratuitous bailee, a duty to take care of those goods. So example is, someone picks up a watch found on the sidewalk, and there was no obligation until he picked up the watch. So now, if he would have walked by that watch, right, it wouldn't have been the bailment. But since he picked it up, now he has an obligation to find out who owns that watch. Okay, that's what that means. He finds nobody, certainly the watch is his. We also look at common carriers, which are trucks and vans, right? Trucking, bus companies, railroads, airliners, and even pipelines. Offers general transport services to the public, standard of an insurer. So you're sitting in a bus and something happens to the bus, they have to insure you. Here in Quebec, certainly, what I would like you to do is to find out a little bit more about the Quebec law of what we have here compared to that. So there will be a question on that too about, let's say you get into an accident here in Quebec. So you'll have a question on that. So you can take a look at that beforehand if you want. So if the goods are damaged, destroyed under care, the carrier is liable even when the damage was not caused by its negligence. So they're responsible for it, right? And this has also got to do with FOB. And we're going to talk, there's going to be a question about FOB. I'm not going to give you more information about that, but I will give it to you in class. So there's no liability when the damage was beyond its control. So in other words, it wasn't their fault. Or it could be an act of war or an act of nature like an earthquake or a flood. Innkeepers, I've got to do with hotels, inns, motels. Also treated like insurers, right? They're responsible for lost or stolen goods of a guest. Establishment qualifies as an inn offering both food and temporary lodging. Now this has to do with if your goods are in the inn or the hotel. If they are in the parking lot, and let's say you leave your bike in the parking lot and or attached to your car and someone steals it, now is that insured? You need to discuss that beforehand. Don't take it for granted that your car is automatically insured because you're parked in their driveway or in their parking lot. So you need to find that out. Okay. Other rights and obligations. A contract govern a bailment for value. Certain statutes. You'll have more information on this in the PDF. Statutes give common carriers, repairmen or repair people, storage facilities, and other bailees for value the right to retain the goods until payment is arranged. So as I was saying before, right, you have to pay a bail money that to the bailee. This money is certainly not theirs, but if you don't retain the goods or you don't give back the value of what you took, unfortunately it does become theirs. So it includes a right to resell the items after given the bailer appropriate notice and opportunity to reclaim the goods. There's also, if you look at it the same way as working as a pawn shop, pawn shops work the same way, right? It's a bail. Protection of the environment. Like I said, this is a very short one. There's only a couple more slides, a few more slides I should say. So protection of the environment, property law, natural resources development, and the protection of the environment. Here, common law comes into play, and there's also legislation. Legislation overlaps authority all levels of government, federal, territorial, provincial, and municipal. This is really a Canadian law. So government regulatory bodies protect the environment. So if you look at the provincial governments, what do they take care of? Forests, minerals, air, and water are all provincial matters. Activities involving such resources become interprovincial. If let's say there's a forest that is in one province or another, it becomes interprovincial, or international in scope, or when they take place on federal lands or in the coastal waters, the federal government then has jurisdiction. So there's a lot of issues with that. When it comes to that, there's going to be a question also about that federal versus provincial. So you're going to have to look up some information on that for sure. And each of the provinces has one general environmental statute that is supplemented by issue-specific legislation. There again, there are rights that are federal and there are provincial. In this case, certain rights when it comes under the environment, there's a statute that is under provincial. There's also an act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Big difference between acts and laws have got to do with the actual wording that comes into play. It's really what that is. An act and a law could be the same thing, but a law is when it actually does something. An act is really just the information that it has in it. So there's a big difference in that way. So the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, not necessarily a law. So a principal federal environmental statute, if there are provincial equivalent provisions, federal provisions of the act don't apply. So they don't overlap. There's going to be one or the other. It's provincial or it's federal. Here in Quebec, we're very lucky when it comes to, let's say, income tax. We're the only one that, of all the provinces, that we have provincial and federal sales tax. That's another matter. So model to the other levels of government, it is a comprehensive statute to prevent pollution, providing research and development, so on and so forth, pollution levels, and investigation also, and punishment of offenses. So yes, if you damage the environment, you certainly can go to jail. Here's some more information. Contains provisions dealing with environmental emergencies, such as accidental discharge of pollutants. Let's say your even simple thing like, I remember once there was a person on our street a long time ago where I used to live. He decided to change his oil right in the middle of the street, and he left the oil right there. And unfortunately, no one caught him, but certainly if they would have caught him, you would have to clean that up and would have to have paid a fine. So important federal legislation, there's all kinds of acts that have come into play. What I'm going to ask you probably here is to look up one of these acts and give us some information with the acts themselves. So you'll have that to do. Right, so municipalities on the other hand and local governments, right? Federal and provincial government are the prime players, but there are certainly going to be municipality laws and also local governments. It depends on the arrondissement, you would say that, or the neighborhood. So however, municipalities and local governments have also significant impact, right? Licensing and permit powers with respect to specific projects. Bylaws come into play. So that might be another question I might give you, is to look up some bylaws. Let's say where you live. Also, enforcing local health and sanitary standards is also municipal. Right? So that's about it for this chapter. Like I said, you please listen to it because like I mentioned, there's going to be a whole bunch of questions coming up right after that have to do, which you have to do a bit of research for. And also what I mentioned is I really want you to look into this chapter a little bit more. And if you have any questions, I want you to try to find the answer yourself. If you really can't find the answer, it'd be more than my pleasure to help you out, certainly. But I'm quite sure you can find it. Great. So thank you very much, and we'll see you later.